Hello YouTube, my name is Plazukas. Today's video is going to be on Stellar Blade, and I know there have been other content creators who have covered this, and I've been very reluctant and hesitant, but today I don't really have much else to talk about for Stellar Blade purposes, so I thought I would do my part in going through this article. And I just want to point out the actual title. It says, Stellar Blade's design isn't the problem, it's how creepy men are being about it. Now, I think that this article would always eventually get to the point where they talk about creepy men. But because the actual character model, Eve, is based on a real woman, it is why they can't use that as the problem as well, right? So I just find it already the premise of the article to be very insincere, right? Of course, men being creepy about female characters is nothing new. Okay, so first of all, there is creepy behavior. It is not isolated to men. Women have creepy behavior as well. Men Google over guys as well. Women Google over guys as well. This is not a gender specific issue. And beauty is subjective. So for somebody that thinks one person is beautiful, another will think somebody else is beautiful. If you live in the United States, there is a perceived idea of what is beauty, what is attractive. If you live in Russia, if you live in Africa or China, that changes. That depends. And then each different culture or society or community, then it changes as well. So there is no preset standard for attractiveness. The hypersexualization of women in media, from TV to movies to video games, a decades-old ongoing issue. Yes, there has been an incessant need to sell sex in almost every form of entertainment because it sells. Now, do I think you should rid the industry of attractive people? No. Do I think being more inclusive is a bad thing? No. It is how it's conducted. It's how it's done. But in defense of this article, I will say, and I stand firm by this, there was a time in the industry that qualities that would be perceived as attractive were allowed to rise to the top. So the criticism of the hypersexualization of the industry is valid. And it was done in a way that was not natural. That is something we cannot ignore. So therefore, to say that there needed to be a correction or a shift, I would agree with. An overcorrection, a complete and utter 180 of that to not allow any attractive people. And I know I'm being hyperbolous, and I know there are attractive people still in Hollywood and in video games, but there was a really big shift. Correcting bad behavior with another form of bad behavior is not a good idea. However, it is especially a problem in video games, as it's estimated about 61% of those working in the game industry are males. Are we going to say all men want characters to look like Eve? They have mothers, by the way. They have sisters, by the way. They have girlfriends, by the way. And let's say half of them want characters to look like Eve. Is that a bad thing? Additionally, although it has been found that women now make up about half of the gaming community, there are misconceptions that gamers are still predominantly male. Now, I will say that I think perception is that men dominate the video game sector. And I do think in the AAA sector that is the case. With the recent accessibility and different difficulty options, I think the space for AAA has become more accessible. And I know the comments that I'm going to get for saying that is suggesting that women cannot beat difficult games or impossible games. That's not what I'm saying. But I think for many women, that is a barrier. And so when you allow for more accessibility, then naturally there's going to potentially be more people that enter the space of all genders, of all species. I mean, not to make a pun here, but your pets are going to be able to play games with how accessible they become. But regardless of that, there are plenty of mobile games in other video games that I do acknowledge they do exist within the genre that are definitely predominantly women. And therefore, if you compile all of them together, then yes, I would say women are about half of the community. Half of the AAA community? No, not even close. 20%, 30%, maybe, max. Hence, from Lara Croft to Bayonetta, women in video games have consistently been heavily sexualized to appeal to men. So I didn't make this point on the previous sentence, but I'm going to make it on this sentence. You know, We do live in 2024. There are women that love women. I just want to make that very clear. There are women who love all types of women. I know a lot of women that love Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian, I would say, from a curviness perspective, from an overall feature perspective, if we're talking about physicality, not to demoralize anyone, specifically her, is more attractive than Eve, potentially. Are we to just assume that it's only men when I've already mentioned that not all men are attracted to women that look like Eve? Not all men are attracted to women to begin with, but this is an agenda-driven narrative. So I understand why you're phrasing it like this and why there's 1,000 ads on this thing. Fortunately, in recent years, video games have done better at portraying women in a more balanced way. Oh, really? You would call it a more balanced way? It's not. It's an overcorrection, to be fair and to be nice. There's nothing balanced about how the gaming ecosystem has shifted from the AAA market. Again, mobile, there's plenty of this. There's plenty of very highly featured, attractive women physically. But AAA is what we're talking about specifically, and it's where it's being targeted the most, which is where you see the difference. Unfortunately, the presence of a few women in video games who aren't exactly what these men want to see has only resulted in escalating their creepiness. Okay, first of all, I mean, that whole sentence is so loaded that I don't even feel like it is fair to break it down. According to conservative men, not approaching the creation of every female character in video games in a way that appeals directly to them is woke, and some deeply disturbed men have taken to going on public rants about it. I mean, you're going on about a rant about how men are creepy. So I don't know who's calling a kettle black. Why would you list conservative men? Are there no straight liberal men who find women attractive? Obviously, you don't want to lump your friends into this to think that they are above the fray. But we've already talked about the overcorrection. So as much as they're the issue, so is the alternative. And so people speaking out about it on both sides is natural. This is what happens when you have dysfunction. Recently, conservatives formulated a conspiracy theory that Sweet Baby Inc. was behind improving the treatment of women in video games, and the inclusion of diverse characters resulted in them boycotting the company. So just for my viewers, I am familiar with Sweet Baby Inc. I've been following it. I'm not an advocate for Sweet Baby Inc. I'm not an advocate for the Steam Discord community that's essentially finding all the games that Sweet Baby worked for and is canceling them or trying to get people to not buy their products, right? Because I come from a mindset of compromise. But when we're having to find attractive women in video games in the AAA scene, yeah, I think that's a natural thing for people to get upset about and to say, okay, well, we know naturally attractive women exist in the world. We know that mostly humans create video games. Some of them are men and women who are attractive to physically fit, above averaged, curvy women. And yet, that's not represented, at least in the last couple of years. So again, if we're not coming to a place of equality or compromise, then this is not even an issue to talk about. And whatever Sweet Baby Inc. is doing or whatever that Steam community is doing, neither of them are going to solve the issue. They're just propagating it even more and more. They're just continuing the dysfunction. Additionally, in their Sweet Baby Inc. detection Discord, men were praising Stellar Blade for being traditional instead of woke with its female-led protagonist. I've just spoke to this. I think both sides are toxic. I don't think anyone's coming from a place of actual compromise, of good-intentioned resolutions. When you use traditional stuff, or when you use woke stuff, these all invoke certain prescriptive tendencies, which I do not support. Why is Stellar Blade controversial? I don't think you can ever answer this question based on all the other sentences that you've had previous to this particular paragraph, but let's see what you say. Ever since the marketing for Stellar Blade began, it has been abundantly clear that men are going to be gross about it. When the gameplay overview was released, the comments were overtaken with commenters fawning over the lead character and declaring it the best game ever solely for the protagonist's design. Admittedly, that is true. I cannot deny that. And I would say that that is not even a negative, because I would argue that that is instinctual. If you don't feed a dog for 3 days and then you give him the most rarest red meat you can find, that dog's going to go wild for that meat. That dog is going to jump over the moon and do the stupidest, craziest, obnoxious, embarrassing things to get that meat. Now, I'd never do that to a dog. I never want to see a dog in that state. I would think you would not want to see a man in that state. If you rig a study to try to get an outcome, you're going to get that outcome. If the goal was to starve men of attractive women to make them look creepier than they already are, just as much as women already are creepy, then I would say you succeeded. There are days in my life where, and so obviously, if there are men who are attracted to Eve's particular physical attributes, not that that is the only thing that's attractive about Eve, then yes, they're going to respond that way. And they may actually respond, even if they're not attractive to Eve, just because of the environment. Meanwhile, Eve has become an anti-woke symbol for conservatives. Of course, one could argue that the game's developers Shift Up can't control men being gross online, and one can't really call them out for hypersexualizing women without calling out the entire industry. Well, that's true. You can't really call out anybody else besides, until you call out everybody else, right? The reality is you can call people out without calling out the entire industry. It's just you're going to look like a hypocrite. You're going to look probably stupid doing it because you're not divulging your own problems, which we all know we have. However, game director Hyung Tae Kim raised eyebrows when he said of Eve's design, "When it comes to the design, we put special attention on the back of the character because the player is always facing the back of the character when they're playing. That's what they see the most of, so we thought this was pretty important." So, obviously, that implies that they made her backside, in this case, let's call it what it is, but a feature. Now, if I were to concede a point, I would say, yeah, that was probably a step too far, right? They didn't have to do that specific thing. He didn't have to say that specifically. And don't misconstrue me. I'm not saying what the art director said was wrong. What I'm saying is that obviously he didn't have to emphasize that, both in his comments and his art direction. Now, I don't know, and there may be more articles and interviews with the art director that said that he, specifically him, he made the buttocks region more exaggerated. We know that Eve is built on a female modeled character, but if you play video games long enough, you also know that you can tweak those settings as well. Once you have a character creator, you can make things larger, rounder. Whether or not that happened in Eve's case, I don't know. I could assume that it did based on his comments. And for the sake of this conversation, let's say he did do that. I don't think that's wrong. And I think we're going to get to this point in the article later on. There's the other part that I read, and then I haven't read anything else after that, I think. What is most important when a game is being made, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, I don't expect many other people to share this. Just like beauty, art is subjective. Art is subjective based on the people that are making that art. Why art is so distinct and so unique is because everybody's interpretation of what art is different. There's commonality, there's shared experiences, interests, but as a conceptual level, art is subjective. But in the case of Stellar Blades, it's even more specific than that. Stellar Blade is specifically targeted for an audience 17 plus. Even if I wanted to criticize the art director's comments and his overly ambitious emphasis on potentially exaggerating the female buttocks more than what the model rendered was, I'm not going to, because at the very conceptual level of this game, it's made for an adult audience. I think that alone is enough to justify an extra here or an extra there from an artistic perspective, art being subjective. Now, I don't know which one came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know if the rating came first in their mind or if the design came first and then the rating came after. Like, I don't know what was their original design. maybe they just had this and then the rating was 17 plus, or they thought that they were going to create a game that was more adult oriented and they presumed that they were going to get it at 17 plus, so they went all in. Either way, the fact that they have the rating of 17 plus allows them to be a little bit more exaggerated, I think. And I don't think that is necessarily toxic or gross or creepy. People who want to wear makeup or overly sexualize their features in our own reality. I think it's all the same. And we go back to this argument, can I call them out? Yes, you can call them out for doing it. I can call out the art director for doing it. I'm not going to. To me, it's not an issue, especially in a 17 plus game. It's already quite strange to hear a director highlighting the extra emphasis that went into a female character's rear. He also doubled down on the sexualization of women in video games, stating, and let's get this before I make a comment, I guess. Honestly, when I play a game, I would like to see someone who is better looking than myself. That's what I want. I don't want to see something normal. I want to see something more ideal. I think that is very important in a form of entertainment. That is, after all, entertainment targeted for adults. Let's give credit where credit's due. This art director is at least prefacing this sentence by saying for adult audiences. Are we now to assume, based on this and your previous lead-in sentence before the statement, that you're suggesting that a man cannot create women's bodies in video games, that the only ones that are able to do that would be women? Are you suggesting that the two women that were fired from Shift Up should have been allowed to stay on the job and create Eve and Taki and Lily, and not the art director who happens to be or identify as a guy, a male? If that's your implications, then I don't know what to say about that. I understand the foundational principle idea that men do not know what women go through and women do not know what men go through. I do understand that. And I do relate to the fact that there are injustices and misguided ideas and principles and morals and all these things that happen when you try to mansplain, female-splain, when you try to talk for the other gender. I get it. And I could, if I wanted to, and there is a case for it, use that same logic to apply to art. In the case of Stellar Blade's Eve, it was modeled after a real-life female person. So this is a non-issue for me. It's an adult-themed game. Eve is modeled after a woman. That's it. We'll leave it at that. It's important to note that the problem with this whole debacle is not about Eve's design. It's not about Eve's design because Eve cannot be in question because it was modeled after a female person. Because we know if it wasn't, that would be the issue as well. Some have claimed that those concerned about this situation are shaming the model that Eve was based on, or suggesting that women shouldn't embrace their sexuality, but that's not what we're saying. The problem is quite simple. A game developer and thousands of internet users are bluntly describing Eve as an ideal woman, the only woman that men want to see. That is not what we're saying. I have not seen any person in my comment section or in the various different places that I've interacted with for the past month that have said those specific words. Not one. Not one. I am almost certain that not all men want characters like Laura, Bayonetta. I don't know the real name of Bayonetta. I never played Bayonetta. Or even Stellar Blade. But we, just like apparently the advocates on the opposite side, want a fair representation. Simple. And listen, there is a debate to be had because that wasn't always the case. I understand that. I am sympathetic to all the causes in the world. I really, really am. I truly am. But alternatively, having this opposing opinion is not advocacy. It's just another way to be toxic, period. Hypersexualization in video games is a problem because it pushes the idea that there's only one ideal body type and that women should be judged on how well they adhere to it. Now, this goes back to identity, and this is a different topic. And it's a very broader, more nuanced discussion about identity in the world today and how it's overtaken many politics. And I'm not even going to talk about my particular opinions on identity. There are men who think that Stellar Blade Eves is an ideal woman. Absolutely. But there are just as many that think Eve is too curvy, is too thick. And there are also enough men who only look at Eve platonically, not sexually. And then there are all the men who eventually will think Eve is a badass action hero that slays monsters and that has a funny personality and whatever else the game allows us to do with Eve besides just the overall appearance of her. Just like we did with Bayonetta, just like we did with Laura. Some have also pointed out that Stellar Blade's design is actually tame in comparison to the company's other games. It has stirred controversy in the past with its highly sexualized female characters, particularly in games like Goddess Victory of Nikke. Still, the fact that Stellar Blade isn't as bad as it could be just doesn't make up for the increasingly creepy comments and behavior arising around this game. Perhaps if all the body types and women were represented in the video games, it wouldn't be such an issue. Okay, wait. You just went through this whole article and basically summed it up with the answer to all problems ever. Representation. But your perceived idea of representation is different than the actual reality. And I'm not going to get into the conversation about LGBTQA plus representation, African American, Asian, Caucasian representation, about how it scales differently in different countries depending on the actual percentage of populations that represent that particular demographic, right? That's what we're dealing with here. So representation is not always 50-50. It's not always 25, 25, 25, 25. I think that's something we should strive for. And then it's something that's idealistic and cool, and I want that for everybody. But that's not always realistic, is it? So I don't know how you can write this article and then have that as your overall summary. And I understand the logic here is that the overcorrection will eventually lead to this actual outcome. Again, it won't, because just like if you get into a relationship with someone who cheats, most likely they're going to cheat on you. Bad behavior does not correct bad behavior. However, Stellar Blade is an example of how male developers continuously push only their narrow views of what women should look like into video games, which is why, in your opinion, we need organizations like, Baby This and Baby That. Additionally, it's just very strange how video games supposedly have to have these ideal characters because they're adult entertainment. There are plenty of other outlets where men can access adult content. However, this push to turn video games solely into adult content for men while ignoring all other audiences is outright bizarre. No one's saying that. No one's saying that all games should be rated 17 plus for adult. We don't want that. I don't want that. That would mean that games like Mario, games like Little Big Planet wouldn't exist. We'd have to change Mario with a big-breasted, curvy woman. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't speak for every man, but I don't want that. I love Mario. I love my little sack boy, which would have to be replaced with a big-breasted, curvy woman in your opinion, in your perverted point of view. Just outrageous. Are there men who just want adult content? Yes. And will they buy the adult content that is made for them? Yes. How many people does that represent? Well, historically speaking, it's a lot. Or at least that's the perception, because sex sells. Is that wrong? Could be. It's debatable. That's a societal issue. That's a bigger issue. And I'll tell you right now, no organization that it gets funded and is for profit, or let's say non-profit, if that's what they want to guise themselves as, that fails to even understand what I'm talking about, is going to fix that. However, this push to turn, it's suggesting that despite men having specific outlets for this content, it now needs to be injected into all media to cater solely to them. That's not what we're saying. That is such a hyperbole statement. While some amount of fan service is understandable for success, it feels very weird to specifically be catering to misogynist men who get triggered if they see a woman in a video game who doesn't look exactly how they want. Wow, what a fucking statement. Talk about being called an incel or creepy. And I'm not going to do this. I'm not even going to imply it, because I'm just going to go to the next sentence. But. It's hard to see how people don't find it creepy that men seamlessly can enjoy video games or won't be entertained if they can't see their version of an ideal woman. I've already spoke to this. I certainly have never heard a woman going on an unhinged rant because they feel personally attacked by men attacked by what men look like in a video game. It also feels very dangerous to be a woman and have men increasingly pushing this idea that any woman who doesn't look like a hypersexualized video game character is woke, triggering, and deserving of their hatred. Okay, all right. So let me speak to the targeting of women in all spectrums of society, or men, or anybody. Don't do it. Don't target people with what they look like. Period. If you're doing that, then yes, that's a form of racism. That's a form of disparagement. That's a behavior that is bad. Just because somebody doesn't look like you doesn't mean they don't share similar values to you. And not that that matters, because it doesn't. Let's be very clear. I mean, I know it does to some racists, bigots, stuff like that, but overall, no. I just don't know this paragraph and why it even exists. Like, I don't even know how to speak on it based on what I've already said, based on how this whole entire article has been conveyed. And so I'm not going to. I'll just leave it as it is, and I'll just have all my other statements speak for themselves. And that's the end of the article. Those are my thoughts. It's a long video. It's 3:30 in the morning. I'm tired. So if some of this didn't work out, listen, I probably won't even make the edit. I probably won't even make this in the edit. But if it does, my name is Bazookas. If you like this content, I probably won't do it again. But if you do, like, subscribe. I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.